Okay, so thank you everybody for coming to lecture 13 in the fourth year of the free non-credit lectures, as the university likes me to continue stating. They're tired of getting phone calls about this Hempology 101 course, and it is not a paid-for lecture. As you all may know, if you sign up to each class in a semester, I'll give you a certificate of completion, but it's as far as we can legally go in a sense. But in a way, I hope to continue to provide free education for a very long time. Hey folks, the handout's right there. And I'm happy to have this as a, I guess, collective service of the International Hempology 101 Society and the Hempology 101 Club that the students have here. Anyway. Today is one of my more favorite topics. The history of Prohibition and history in general is something I love to talk about. And so I'm going to just jump right into that and go off into a new direction that I don't really have documented either in the PowerPoint presentation, the handout, and I haven't really read it recently either. But there's all sorts of things that are going on with the Prohibition and its history. It's hard to sum up in half an hour. But anyway, as you would probably come to understand, there was a time and place, and really the entire world existed without any prohibitions beyond what the natural world would stop us from doing. So there was all sorts of things that we were prohibited from doing that would cause us harm, jumping off cliffs, for example, or eating certain berries or roots. But we went around and really did, live and die experimenting with the natural world for not just hundreds of thousands of years, but really millions of them. That's been, in some ways, what's distinguished us from other animals and other life forms, really, is that we've always been focused on learning more and achieving more. And it's interesting to try and figure out exactly when that inspiration occurred and how. Some of us certainly believe drugs, as we now call them, that plants and mushrooms, because fungi are a different life form, to be sure. In fact, a lot of people think mushrooms are the oldest living intelligent form of life on the planet. Mushroom spores can live in interstellar space, and as such, it's quite likely that mushroom spores began landing on our planet when water was first forming, and that, as I say, one of the first intelligent or complex forms of life on the planet is, in fact, the magic mushroom. And so I've sort of joked about how it's our job to take mushrooms and water and spread them around the rest of the universe. But anyway, how and when mushrooms that cause hallucinations, or other plants, be it peyote or ayahuasca or cannabis, began being used for recreational, medicinal, exploratory purposes is something we'll never figure out. It's fun to debate, but it happened, I'll tell you that. And it certainly contributed to the development of our language and culture, and at times inventions, no doubt, as well. So, economically and scientifically and culturally, we owe a lot to all of these various plants and fungus. And so, on the other hand, it's also really hard to pinpoint, at least with a time and place, when the prohibition of these various plants and substances began to take effect. And a lot of us look at the last century of legal prohibitions as being the beginning of these laws and almost just moral ways of thinking. And we can, before I get to discussing what I think were some of the historical occasions, there's one great myth around Prohibition that many people in the world are familiar with, that in a way is a very, I think, useful story. because the original sin, as it's written about in the Old Testament, is certainly, again, and this is, you know, as much my theory as it is historically documented, though more and more people are seeing this to be true, that the tree of life, and in my opinion, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, represent not only the cannabis plant with the tree of life, but the magic mushroom with the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and the people and cultures that would use and essentially worship these plant, at the time, deities, essentially. And so the story of the original sin is, in my opinion, based primarily on the attempt by the sort of Hebrew Jewish religious community to condemn the pagan worshipping that was going on, and I'm talking about, I think it was 621 BC, when the Book of Law was introduced into Jerusalem by a lawyer. Essentially, it was like this first fraud, right? Prohibition is a fraud, okay? And the first time, historically, was, I can't remember exactly the guy's name, but he just shows up, he's like, I got this Book of Law from Moses, right? Our forefather, who in his wisdom said that we have to, you know, stop all of these pagan traditions that are around us, and we need to, you know, sort of cleanse ourselves and become pure in order to enter into, you know, this state of tranquility and oneness of God that we're not achieving right now. And one of the reasons we're not achieving it is because of these various again, I say plant deities, and I'll get to that in a sec here, although I have talked about it in the history of cannabis, because I love talking about ancient history. So, you know, the reason that I say plant god, for example, is the two of the three cultures, the Assyrians and the Babylonians, that held the you know, Hebrew Jews in captivity, worshipped both the tree of life and, in my opinion, the magic mushroom, but certainly more the cannabis plant is the tree of life. The kings would have special gardens, and there's all sorts of documentation to prove that they worshipped it. You know, and the idea that these were plant gods was in part because the religious leaders, you know, healers, would convince people that they were either healing them or giving them spiritual direction or nourishing them in every way, physically, mentally, and spiritually, when they fed them different plants. Like, you know, you feed someone a pot cookie with the seeds in it, and you really are giving them, and I don't mean cookie, like you could just make up some kind of mash stuff and stick it all together and tell someone that you're helping them, you know, reach not only a higher state, but go to another place by eating a piece of this deity that would appear as sort of a plant angel in this sense. And that's why mushrooms were even more sacred or thought to be special than cannabis, because they just appear magically overnight sometimes in some places with no explanation. And so there is even considered with mushrooms to be a very specific time in its maturity, that it was at its peak, that you were supposed to pick it and say a prayer to that deity from which it came from and was a part of, and by entering into you, that deity would transmit some knowledge to you, usually when you were unconscious, because it would knock you out. You'd eat so much back then. We really didn't take small dosages, and we're probably not very tolerant to some of these things at times. But anyway, you know, the Assyrians and the Babylonians, they worshipped the tree of life and used this ancient tree of knowledge of good and evil as well. And so the original prohibitions that the Jewish community set in place around 321 BC, again, were about cleansing themselves of all of these other pagan traditions that in some ways they would think infected their community, both morally and actually physically, because now I'll switch over to the sort of situation with Moses, because Moses was the first prohibitionist.